So I'm not muted? Okay. And am I recording the video? I don't necessarily want to record the video.
The video is recorded as it's broadcast.
Okay. But is it recording both, like that and this camera? No, probably not, right?
Correct. Nope, it should only be recording that. But go ahead and if you want to disable this camera locally, you should be safe to click that little button.
Okay. Okay.
Cool. Thank you, all set.
All right, thanks a lot for your help. Okay. Thanks for coming. So I want to get I'm Ted Bowman. I have a training company called 6 Mile Tech, 6miletech.com. I'm Ted Bow on Drupal.org and Twitter. We're an organizational member, and I'm an individual member. If you are a Drupal, if you use Drupal a lot, either you or your organization, I don't know, just becoming a member kind of helps keep the lights on Drupal.org. It's a nonprofit. So you can contact us for staff training, one-on-one consulting, client training, online classes. So how many people are mainly Drupal developers? How many people are developers but with some other system? How many people are WordPress developers? Okay. How many people have written or know what SQL is, SQL is? Okay. Okay. All right. So the topic today that I'm doing is entities, bundles, and fields. So you need to understand this. Why? So why do you need to understand this? Because in Drupal, you often use different entity types. You install modules that create entities. You create new bundles, and you create new fields. So going the wrong way. And you attach existing fields to bundles. So, but through the Drupal lets you actually know through the UI when you are creating new fields. Besides that, it never mentions the terms we talked about are never mentioned through the Drupal UI. So these are sort of key underlying concepts in Drupal, but you wouldn't know it by like looking at the Drupal interface. So the UI doesn't mention entity types or bundles unless you install specific modules. But most, like the core Drupal doesn't mention them. So there are key concepts of how Drupal works. So that's why you need to learn this. Okay. So understanding entity types and bundles will help you choose modules. So a lot of modules actually use the underlying entity architecture to do what the functionality they add to Drupal. So when you understand this, it sort of helps you better choose this module or that module depending how they're using or not using the entity system. It helps you understand how modules work that you might already be using, like views, rules, Profile 2 module, and a lot of others. So entities and bundles in core, these are some of the entity types that come with core nodes, which is your content, terms for taxonomy, users, and then comments. And then files are also entities in Drupal core for 7, but they're not fieldable. So all of the rest of these you can add fields to. So out of the box, when you're installing Drupal, your basic page or your article has a text field and an image field. And it has a tags field. And you can also add fields to users or to terms. But out of the box, you cannot add fields to files, and that's because they're not fieldable. So the same thing for comments. Like comments has a subject, which is not actually a field, but it has the body field. But you could actually attach an image field to comments. So maybe every time somebody comments on an image, they could also, or comments on a node, they could also upload an image. And then in the contrib space in Drupal, a lot of contrib modules will declare their own entity type. So there's a module called Profile 2, and it defines the profile's entity type. There's a media module, which has the media asset, And then Commerce Lime item comes from the Drupal Commerce. So a lot of modules do this. They'll define a new entity type. In Drupal 8, there's more core entities. So different configuration items like node type, menu link, and date format, they're going to be entities. They're not fieldable, so you won't be able to add an image field to a menu link. But last time when I made this presentation was a while ago, and at that point I counted 32 different entity types in Drupal 8. There's probably more. There were probably more at that time. I probably just didn't have all the modules turned on in core that would declare an entity type. And entities are classed objects. So basically, if you actually have to get into doing programming with entities in Drupal 8, it should be easier, where I'm pretty sure this is true, they'll all inherit from a base entity class. So a node would be a subclass of an entity. So all entities share properties. So all nodes have a sticky publish, change date, or created date property. And all comments have a subject and a node ID property. So the node that they're attached to is a property of the comment. So feel free to stop me, ask questions along the way. Yeah.
You say all entities share properties. Are they singletons?
It's not. They're not really. Sorry, I shouldn't say share properties. They all have the same properties. Sorry, I should actually change that. Yeah. So every node would be either sticky or not sticky. So how to spot an entity through the UI. So often you'll see a page like this in Drupal. So the first one is the content type administration screen. The second one is maybe from this module called Entityform, and the bottom one is from the profile module. But you'll see when you're seeing the administration for an entity type, usually you have this, especially if it's fieldable, and most of the ones that you actually deal with through the UI are fieldable, where you actually have an administration where you can add new types. You'll see the manage field and manage display, and we'll get into what that does later. But so how to spot an entity, this is another thing in the views. When you're making a view in Drupal, the first thing it asks you is, what do you want to list? And these are usually all of your entity types. There actually can be other things in here that aren't entities, but I'm pretty sure all of your entity types will be in here, and you'll have some additional things. So if we look at here, we have content. There's content revisions, which is some entities are revisionable. Your taxonomy terms, which are entities, users, mail log, which is a mail development module I had installed when I took this screenshot, so that's not an entity. Field collections are entities. So every time you install a module that makes a new entity type, it'll probably show up here. So you basically, I'll show you later why it's important, but you kind of get for free the ability for integration with views. So most entity types are divided into bundles. So for an example, a node, the bundles of node that you get out of the box are article and basic page. So for terms, you have keywords and tag. No, you don't. Out of the box, you don't have keywords, but you could make a vocabulary called keywords, and you have the one called tags out of the box. So those are bundles for terms. And users, there actually is a bundle under user. There is an entity type called user, and there's a bundle called user, but you never see it through the UI. And some entity types only have one bundle. So the bundle's there if you ever actually programmatically have to deal with it, but it's not something you would see through the UI. So you can't add, like, when you install Drupal, you have the article and you have the basic page, and you can make another content type, which would be basically another bundle, like an event or a blog post. But for users, you can't actually add another user bundle. So roles are not bundles. So roles is a way to assign permissions in Drupal, but it's not actually a bundle. Do you have a question? think there's an implicit bundle that is the same. If you're defining an entity type and you don't declare a bundle, you have the implicit just one there. But I mean, for all purposes, for the purposes of what you're dealing with through the administration UI, it doesn't really matter that there's that sub level of user. It's just programmatically this is how it works. But the benefit of bundles is that you can add different, which we'll get into, is that you can add different fields to each one. But when there's only one, you can just add fields to users. And there's a way through a contrib module you can kind of get around that, which I'll show later. But or you can't really get around the fact that there's no bundles. But I'm not positive if I think they implicitly always will have that one. So how you spot a bundle is this is like an administration page for individual bundles. So up there we have company information, and that's actually a profile type for the Profile 2 module. So if it's a fieldable bundle, if it's a fieldable entity type, the bundle administration pages are going to have these managed fields and managed display. So basically they're all using the same central field UI. So part of the benefit of this is like you don't have to, if I declare a fieldable entity type, I don't have to reinvent how fields work. They just automatically will work once I set up my administration. Another way you see it is we looked at the example before where the left-hand drop-down, this is the Views UI. Who has no idea what the Views is? Okay, Views is basically like a SQL builder, and it's like a list builder where you can say, I want to filter by something, and I want to show certain fields, and I want to add a relationship. So it's kind of a way to make SQL through the UI, and this is the wizard screen when you first go in to make this. You say, what do I want to list? I want to list content, and then since I'm saying I want to list content, over on the right, it's saying, what type of content do you want to list? So I could say all, or I could pick one of those particular ones. So maybe I only want to show a district, which is a particular content type for this site. So what we have here is they've already chosen the entity type, which is content. So another confusing thing in the UI in Drupal is sometimes it refers to the nodes as content or just as nodes. So if you see content and node, that's kind of interchangeable in the Drupal UI. So after they've selected the entity type content, now you would have the choice to choose the actual bundle. So this would be the same for the terms. So if I say, okay, I want to list taxonomy terms, it's saying, okay, which bundle of taxonomy terms? And in this one, there's two vocabularies, tags and state. So even if you've, have been using Drupal for a while, you may not have heard of bundles. And that is because that's one of the things that's not labeled in the Drupal UI anywhere. And the reason it's this is because there's usually a different label that's used for different entity types. So nodes, it's called content type. So you add a new content type for a node, but what you're really adding is a bundle. For terms, it's called vocabulary. So on nodes, the content type would be blog post, basic page, article. For terms, the vocabularies would be tags or categories, or sometimes people use like geographic states or countries as a vocabulary. And then for profile 2, it's called profile type. So that's why, even though these are all the underlying architecture is that these are entity types divided up into bundles, you don't actually see that on the UI because they call the entity type something different, and then the bundles, it never refers to as a bundle of nodes, as a content type for the node. Questions? Okay, so this is an example of a bundle property page. So this is the content type page. So it's asking what is the label for this, for the title field. So when you enter an article, it's going to ask for the title. But you could change this if it was, say, a school district. You might change it from title to district name or something like that. There's some other things in here like should the user have to preview it before they make it, or should preview be disabled or optional. Other things like one of the properties that nodes have is promoted to the home screen or published. And so on the bundle administration page, so this is not for an individual node, but this is saying, okay, when I'm setting up the content type or bundle blog post, do I want them to be published by default or not published by default? So these are bundle properties. This is another bundle property page. This is the vocabulary page. So the vocabulary page here has a name. So this is called tags and then a description. So you can see that some bundles, when an entity type is declaring, what properties it want to have, it has to, usually they're going to make a UI for that. Technically, they don't have to. Some of these might just be behind the scenes, but usually there's a UI configuration for it. So this is the vocabulary one. So we have entities, entity types, bundles, and now we're going to deal with an individual entity. So an individual entity is an instance of an entity type. And every entity belongs to a bundle, so even users belongs to that implicit users bundle that you never see through the UI. So an example would be, so this is entity type colon bundle, so user, entity type, and the bundle is user, and then an individual example would be the user1 admin is a individual entity, user entity. And then here we have the entity type node, and then the blog or the bundle is blog entry, and then an individual blog post would be a entity of the node type, of the node entity type. And then an example would be for term. Term is the entity type, tag would be the bundle, and then if I write an article and I type tags, or I type awesome in the tag session, I'm basically creating an individual entity of the term entity type, which is in the bundle tag that is awesome. So you can see that in this case, the tag pretty much, or the term entity type really only just, unless you add a field to it, it's only going to have a name itself. I guess it has a description too, but in most cases when you add a term, you're not adding the description. Any questions on this? So how many people have done object-oriented programming? I mean, you could kind of think of this as there's this sort of parent class of entity, and then there's a subclass for each of the individual bundles. It's not really like that, but basically, it's kind of like that's not what's happening behind the scenes, but it's similar in the way that they share properties, and then a bundle will inherit if you think about an individual blog entry, always has either published or unpublished. So that would actually come from the entity type. So all nodes are going to have published or unpublished, sticky or unsticky. But then there's going to be certain things about blog entries that are different from other nodes. So how this works on the back end is all entities of a type share a base table, and I'll show an example of this. So they're not separated by bundles. So I've given an example of article and basic page. There is not an article table and a basic page table. All the nodes, their core information besides the fields are stored in one table. So a table column usually specifies the bundle. That doesn't have to be that way, but that's pretty much all the ones that I've seen. So if there's more than one bundle. So the user table, there's not a column that says which bundle it is because there's only one bundle. There's no need for the column. So that makes it really easy to query entities of the same type, but different bundles. So if we look here, I realize the font's not that big, but this is the node table, part of it. It goes off to the right more. But you can see here, this is type column, has web form, which is a content type or a bundle, web form page, web form. So you can see here that we're storing nodes of the same, we're storing nodes which are all the same entity type but different bundles in the same table. So that's why views, which I'll show in a second, but also if you had to write queries yourself, it's really easy to say, you know, show me all of the web forms and pages. And so these other things you have here is a node ID, this is a version ID, this is the language, and then that's the title. So these are things that are generally, you know, referred to as properties of the entity. So there are things that usually live on the base table of the particular entity type. So fields. So entity types can either be fieldable or non-fieldable. Most of the ones that we're talking about and most of the ones that you see through the UI are fieldable. So each bundle can have different fields, but all entities of a specific bundle will have the same fields. So out of the box, when you install Drupal, you have your article has image, tags, body field. So all of the articles you're going to have are going to have those particular fields. Like the person doesn't necessarily have to fill out the value, but they have the fields whether they're empty or not. And a basic page just has a text box. Yeah.
Can you give me an example so I can understand of an entity that has different bundles?
So the node. So let me see if I get. So if we look back here, so sorry, I'm trying to get forward. Okay, so this is, we have the node, and the article and basic page are bundles for the node. So basically, right out of the box, Drupal has attached different fields to each one of these. And you can create, usually in the UI, you're creating new bundles. So there is a module that I'll mention later that lets you actually create new entity types. But usually, the module is defining the entity type. In this case, it's defined by the core node module. And then it will maybe make some default bundles for you. Like, so Drupal core says, I think you're going to want articles and basic pages. But you can either delete those and add more, or just leave those and add more. Usually through the UI, what's happening, the pattern is the module creates the entity type. It either will make some sort of sensible default bundles, or it won't, and you just have to make bundles if you want to use it. So, and then you can start adding fields to them. You can delete the existing fields, add new ones, or whatever. So this would be for nodes. This is the terms. So the terms are subdivided into vocabularies, which are another word for, which is what you call a vocabulary bundle. So by default, it comes with tags. You might, this is a kind of bad example because you probably wouldn't have tags and keywords. You'd probably have one or the other, but you might have tags, which is sort of like anything you want to type, and then you might have a category, which is only one of 5 that you choose. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I try to use open source software, but man, I do not like LibreOffice presentation.
Why? I'd love to hear it later.
Okay.
Because I love it.
Well, you know, if it works for you. My mouse disappears sometimes. That's one thing. Okay, so we got here. So entity types can be fieldable and non-fieldable. So each bundle can have different fields. So the idea that an article has different fields than a basic page, but all entity types of a specific bundle will have the same fields. Like every article that you make is going to have an image field. You don't have to fill up the value, but the field's there. So this is fields can be shared between entity types. So right out of the box, there's a body field with Drupal core that's on article and on basic page. And then there's the tags field, which is by default only on article. But meaning, what it means that it can be shared between different entity types is I could add that same field, the tags field, to a user. So if I want users to be able to like tag themselves, like these are my interests or something like that, I could do that. So that would be sharing a field between entity types. For example, we have field state, so this might be a geographic state, and so the label is field state and the machine name is field underscore state. So these are examples we might want to add it to the user. So in this case, it's added to the user entity type, the bundle user, and then field underscore state is the field. And then we also might want to add it to an event. So the event is entity type node, the bundle is event, and then the field is field state. And then we also might want to add it to a profile, like a company profile. So the entity type is profile 2, and then the bundle is company, and then the field is field state. So this is basically one field that we've attached multiple places. So this is not true in Drupal 8. So in Drupal 8, you can attach the fields across bundles in a particular entity type, but you can't attach them to different entity types. So in that case, if I started this off and the first place I put fields underscore state was on the user, I could not then put that same field on event. I'd have to make another field like field event state or something like that. So it used to be that you could just add them, you could just reuse a field across all your entities. Unless this is out of date, you can't do that in Drupal 8. I think that's pretty much set in stone. I forget the exact reason why they didn't want to have that in there. It's really only convenient if you're doing something programmatically. If you want to do something programmatically to an entity and you don't care what type it is, but you're concerned with what fields it has attached, then it's convenient to have the same exact fields attached. But through the UI, because you can't list different entity types in one view, then it really often doesn't matter if they are sharing the same exact field or not. So using views, this means that using views, you can really easily list all the nodes. Did I skip a screen? Let's see here. Okay, yeah, I didn't skip a screen. So it's really easy in views to say I want to list all of the nodes where field state equals Florida, and that means that I may have attached field state to events, maybe to articles, maybe to blog posts. So I can say, show me all of the nodes, irrespective of the bundles they are, so irrespective of the content types, where field state equals Florida. What views cannot do is views cannot say, give me all the nodes and the users where field state is Florida. And that's basically because of the base table, because it doesn't share a base table, and its views doesn't do unions. So you can't query across the multiple tables like that. Yep. You can make a relationship that would show them, but the user, it'd be easy to say, show me all the nodes That's the one I need. Okay. Yeah, see, my mouse has disappeared. That's one of the things I don't like about it. Slideshow. Okay. So, yeah, so this is basically because why we can show all the nodes that had Florida as state is because page, articles, web forms, all the nodes share the same table, whereas nodes and users are not stored in the same table. So an example of fields is you might have the entity type node, which has an article, content type, which is a bundle, and it might have the body, tags, and image. And then basic page, by default, which is a bundle, might have just the body field. And then you might have the entity type user, which has the bundle user, which is not seen through the UI. And then we have the address field, which you might have an address for each user. So some field lingo for Drupal. So the base field is the definition of the definition of the field, but then every time you add it somewhere, it's called a field instance. So that's basically the base field attached to a particular bundle. So the first time you make a field, so this would be field. So our field state, field underscore date is the base field. But then when I attach it to the user, I have a field instance. If I attach it to the event, I have a field instance. And then if I attach it to the profile, I have a field instance. So that basically means I have one field now with 3 field instances. So when you add a new field that you've never added before, what happens is the first time you add it, you're shown one form. And then which sometimes the second form will look very similar. So basically the first form you're configuring the base field, and the second time you're configuring the particular field instance. When you reuse that same field, so I'm taking a field that I've already used somewhere, I'm only showed one form, that's for the field instance. It's because basically I've already configured the base field the first time I added it. So that confused me when I was first dealing with fields in Drupal. Is like, okay, I add the field and it asks me some options, and then I hit submit, and now it shows me the same form with just a little bit more options. It's like, why didn't you just ask me all that once? So basically what's happening is it's getting that base field thing. So there's certain properties of fields that are only configurable in the base field. So like the length of the field that will be in the SQL table, that the column will be, that's only configurable in the base field. It's because they're all stored in the same table, so I can't, if I have Florida state or field state, and I want it to be just 2-character varchar, I can't then attach it somewhere else and make it a 60 varchar. I can make the maximum. I could have one with 60, and then once I attach it, say, well, somebody can only enter 2 characters, but the table is still going to be the same. So on the SQL backend, so for field instances of a base field, there's one table for current data, and then there's one table for revision data. So for example, if we have the field tags, there'll be a table called field data tags, and then there'll be a table called field revision field tags. So basically, Drupal's making this behind the scenes. You don't have any control over how this happens. But the idea is extracting all of the revision data to a separate table basically means the only stuff that's going to be in the field data table is the current value. So if I have, say, 10,000 nodes on my site, and they all have tags fields, but some of those nodes maybe have 100 revisions. The field data table is not getting bigger every time I make a revision. It's not getting more rows. All that stuff is moving back to the field revision. So when views, or if I query it via SQL, I don't have to worry about a table just getting huge because of the revisions. I mean, the revision table will get huge, but that's not usually what you're querying. So this is an example of the tags table. There is actually more stuff over to the right, but what I'm showing here is that you have the entity type. So here, field tags is attached to the web form, to the entity type node, bundle web form, entity type node, bundle article, and then entity type user, bundle user. So you can see I was able to attach field tags to different entity types and different bundles. So what is our time? Oh, okay. So there's some helper modules. There's a helper module called the Entity API. So basically, when the entity system was made for Drupal 7, it was kind of like half-baked as far as being able to actually go in there and program for it. So somebody made the Entity API module. It has a bunch of helper classes, which are really nice. So back to views. Views can list entities of different bundles, but the same type, same entity type. But views can't list entities of different entity types. So rules, you get. So I guess I mentioned the Entity API. Entity API adds sort of generic programming interface for entities, but it also implements that API for things like views and rules. So, or maybe just for views, but then rules does it. So, rules can react to all entity events if you create new entities, and it also can figure out what fields you have on an entity and which properties you have on an entity. There's a couple classes like the entity field query and a metadata wrapper, which if you ever have to actually go in and make custom code and you're updating different entities, I definitely recommend using these. They're just classes that make it, because the way that fields are stored on the node objects or entity objects are kind of crazy nested as far as like different languages and the different language values. So this kind of just makes it so you don't have to worry about them that much. So there's a couple. These are just some examples of different modules that create new entities. So we have Profile 2, Entityforms, and Entity Construction Kit. So the Profile 2 module, it provides multiple profiles for users, and you can restrict the profiles based on role. And so why this is cool, it's kind of like bundles for users. So remember I said there was only one bundle for users, so you can't attach different fields to different types of users. So this basically you can use it to say, okay, I'm going to have a blogger role and I'll make a blogger profile. This will allow me to add fields that are only available to bloggers. So basically, if I have a blogger bio that doesn't make any sense for the rest of my staff, that field won't be on the rest of the users. So it lets different roles have different fields. Example, blogger profile has fields that pertain to only bloggers. It makes two entity types. One's the profile type, and this is not fieldable, and it contains information. It's what they call a bundle of. It's a bundle of bundles, kind of. So, and then the profile is the one that you see through the UI, and that is fieldable. So every time I would make a new profile type, I would make one entity of the profile type, and every time a user comes in and adds their profile, they're making an entity of the type profile. So an example, Joe is a blogger. He has an instance of the blogger entity, which is the bundle is blogger profile, and he maybe has the fields, how long have you been blogging, and what's your favorite blog post. So why another entity type? Why did they make this module? So basically, in Drupal 6, there was like this content profile. It basically would just take a node and use it as a user profile. So it has, why not to do that is because basically it has different properties, like the profiles don't really need a published or unpublished or sticky status, which all nodes have. And it has different behaviors. So you have one profile per bundle per user, whereas to make the node, if you were using the node for that, you would have to enforce that programmatically yourself. And there's no comments attached. So those are differences between nodes. And it separates it out for contrib modules. So it's basically a way to say I want to see all profiles independent of what bundles they are. I could do that with views. So there's another module called Entityforms, Fieldable Forms. So it provides fieldable forms for surveys, polls, etc. It allows you to reuse any fields in your forms, provides automatic rules and views integration, and reduces the amount of code needed compared to something like web forms. It's also cool because I made it. And you could create a survey with geofields.
Could you just tell us a little bit more about why it's different from web form?
So web forms does not use standard fields. So let's say you had a survey where you wanted to, I think in my example, it's like I'm collecting geographic information. So you want to have a map on the screen, and you want the user to be able to say, okay, some event happened here, here, and here just by clicking, right? So if you use Entityforms, that would be really easy because there's already a geofield module that I made Entityforms that I didn't write. Whereas web forms, because it doesn't use standard fields, you can't just take that geofield module and just use it on there. So web forms has still had a lot of advantages over Entityforms, especially if you're using. Basically, I tell people like the main divider is if you're handing off the ability to make forms to your client, you should use web forms, because basically with Entityforms you do it all through the field UI like you're making new content types. So that's not something usually if you are making sites for other people you want to hand off. And also web forms, the way web forms works, every time you add a new component, it's not making a new table. Whereas what we saw before, every base field has 2 tables. So that's not something you want to make like a 300-page survey with. Whereas web forms, there's like one table that stores all the components. I mean, there'll be a new row each time, but not a new table. So that's the real big difference. Yep, no problem. So how it works is a very similar profile to, you have Entityform types, which are not fieldable, so it stores the information. So every time I make a new form type, I'm making an Entityform type. So if I say, okay, I want the satisfaction survey, that would be an Entityform type. And then every time somebody submits it, it's an Entityform submission. And that is fieldable. So an example would be a customer survey. It's an instance of Entityform entity. Its bundle is customer survey, and the module and the fields might be how was your experience and who helped you. Is this to 550 or 6? 6. Yeah, I think it's just 6 this time. Okay. So why not web forms? You can use any Drupal field, has out-of-the-box rules and views integration, and it's really easy to extend, especially if you know how to do any programming for nodes or anything. You basically already know how to do the programming for Entityforms because you can just use the entity system. There's one called Entity Construction Kit. So in all the other modules that I've introduced, it's like you have an entity type defined by a module, and then you add new bundles. Entity Construction Kit kind of takes like one level more, where you actually can create new entity types through the UI. So you create a new entity type, and then you create a bundle, bundles under it. So why it's cool, allows you to create entity types, and it provides a developer framework for creating entity types. So you can either do it through the UI, or it also has helper functions for you to just create your own entities in code. An example would be an employee entity. So if you are installing a module X, how do you know whether it makes an entity type or not? So you could read the docs. Now, what docs? Or the docs don't say. So you could search the files in the module for implements hook entity info. So any module that defines a new entity has to implement that hook. If it doesn't implement that hook, it cannot define a new entity. Is that true? I guess that's pretty much true. If they do it another way, they're not doing it right. So making your own entities, if you're storing data in a table, it's pretty easy to make it an entity type, and there's not much overhead to it because there's not really any other tables created. You just implement hook entity info and you say, here's my base table and stuff like that. That's basically, yeah, there's some other properties, but you basically just implement this hook and tell it some information about it. You basically tell it how you're storing the data in the table, and And that's it, unless you want a UI, then you have to do some more programming. But besides that, So some other example fields are modules. These are ones that create new field types. So there's one called field collections, organic groups in Drupal Commerce. I'm going to skip field collections for time purposes. Organic groups, it's basically a way of creating user groups on your site. Example would be a team content type. You could make a group. It uses fields for everything. It's crazy. So if a node is a group, that is controlled by a field. Whether an individual entity inside a group is part of group content or not, that's a Boolean field. Whether something should be visible to people outside of the group, that's also a field. So basically, instead of writing all of its own code for defining these properties, it says if you attach this group field to any bundle, it just becomes a group. So the entity types that it makes are membership types and an individual membership. So it allows different fields per membership type. So if I want, have a team, and one of the fields is, your picture, like team profile picture, you could do that. So each person who signs up for the team could have their own picture. But also if you had something like committee membership, and committee membership might actually have a date field, which is like expiration. So you could have different membership types, and depending on which fields you attach, you could have different functionality. So maybe a team doesn't have a date because there's no expiration to your membership. But maybe a committee, you would add a date field because there's an expiration. It allows you to have rules to react to when somebody creates a membership. So Drupal Commerce, it's the sort of default commerce system for Drupal 7, and it makes tons of entity types, and it's super flexible commerce system. So just an example of some entity types that it makes: each payment transaction is an entity, products are entities, orders are entities, customer profile, every line item like a discount on a order is an entity type, and then the order itself is an entity. And so why this is great is you can add fields to all of these. So instead of having a standard custom profile, it starts off with certain fields, but then you can add stuff just for you. Or you can make a new line item that is like add a field that has a date that's like shipping date, like this should not ship until October 1st or something like that. And then it also defines a bunch of field types like line item reference, customer profile reference, price. And then also another thing is, because we're using this underlying field system, when they made Drupal Commerce, they said, we want a better way to store addresses. So they made an address field. But the fact that they were using bundles and entity types, because they made that address field module just for their purposes, it's a field, so now we can use it everywhere else. So the kind of benefit of having this system where fields are reusable all over different places is if somebody says, well, I need an address field for my commerce system, they not only benefit, but anybody who also needs an address field maybe on users or nodes can now take that. Let's see here. I'm going to stop now for questions. Anybody? Questions about this? It's very sort of confusing until you really get down and start using it. And you don't necessarily need to know all this stuff, but I think the deeper you get into Drupal, the more valuable this kind of stuff is. So again, 6 Mile Tech, we do Drupal training, either in person or online. Yeah. I guess that's it. All right, thanks.
Do
you only do Drupal development?
Yeah. Well, I do Drupal training mostly. Yeah. But I mean, I used to do other development, but
Do you have your own company?
Yeah,
You kind of support yourself entirely with Drupal. That's pretty awesome.
Drupal's really easy to support yourself with.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's great. There's crazy amounts of work in Drupal. It's harder to do just training, but development is, there's not enough people doing it, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
I definitely want to get better at it. It seems like a way to make websites really quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way to make powerful websites quickly. There's easier, quicker ways to make simpler websites quicker. So it's not like, I wouldn't say it's the quickest way to make websites, but it's the quickest way. It's one of the quicker ways to make very, very flexible websites.
I'm a Laravel and LAMP stack developer.
I've heard really good stuff about Laravel.
It's amazing. You
Yeah.
know how Drupal 8 integrates with Symfony?
Yeah.
I just heard about that today.
Yeah,
I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah,
Laravel is it's a lot like Symfony.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Drupal is like, there's so much stuff underneath the hood. Like, I suppose something like Laravel is probably simpler. Yeah.
It might be simpler, but it doesn't give you the ability to do anything without writing lots of code.
Yeah, that's the thing with Drupal. I mean, it's really different, like the types of, oh, you're at Fuzz?
Yeah.
It's like a trade-off. I mean, I really like Drupal, but it definitely took some, it's kind of like a mind shift as far as like, okay, I'm not going to write all my code, and I'm just going to, sort of depend on all these modules. So it gets to the point where until you start really doing really advanced Drupal stuff, a lot of times you're just putting modules together, which sometimes if you're a programmer, you can be like, I want to program. And that's why I'm a programmer.
Yeah,
But,
we make modules for like the CMS and the API and stuff like that. So we spin up an app, we just drop those in there, and scaffolds are back.
Yeah.
There's still more to do.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting though. I've learned a lot. Until you totally gave me an easy introduction.
Cool. Cool.
Follow through with it.
Yeah, cool.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
So we actually turn it to we have two sides. So that's one. But it's trying to think of what you policies so like use whatever you want. One more thing is using
I hear that idea.
well, it's still for 90, in the 90th percentile, it's still a better option for don't have to
Well, that's nice.
you don't have to understand the instructions called on Windows, which is always a problem.
Just doing dev desktop. Well, that's
Oh, yeah, that should be good. It's the rush support that desktop too is so much better. The things like that, there are a bunch of reasons why this to make a lot of stuff here, and there are things that they just make terrible design decisions. And, oh,
I haven't used it that much.
it's Dev Desktop 1 did this really clever local multi-site. The local host is a separate site, and it symlinks back. Even in Windows, it symlinks back to default. But the settings.php is unique to that setting. Now what they do is they inject on the bottom of settings.php piece of code, so you have to copy it back up. That code is always there, even after you. It's no longer on the
Well, I was actually
That's one of those things. Right now, one of the bugs, which they claim was a feature of the is that if you do a site import and it fails, it's got to be stuck. If you remove a site from the control panel, it deletes the code. That's, yeah, they say that people actually ask it. But I said, I think it ought to, a box that says, do you want to delete the code base or do you want to just delete our footprint?
Yeah, usually that, like with library, it's for everything, but it's just like, you want to delete some file system or that be the catalog?
Yeah, so that's one. It's having problems, and it's only becoming unfortunately right now fighting firewalls. Windows machines, it doesn't know what to do with home directories that are network files that are directory, not directory. So it tries to create this .octave directory. It fails. It doesn't tell you it fails, but then it creates two subdirectories inside the root directory and can't find them. So it's, well, and yeah, like I said, there are, the Drush integration. There's so many things that work so much better.
Oh, you mean at work?
I mean, almost all of our team is doing it, but these are just the things we're discovering as we're using it. And a couple of things we've got to be careful. It's just, and it's frustrating because you can't I don't actually like the state. I know. Getting certified to be a trainer. And just write them on the back of my card.
Okay.
Separation.
Oh, you're in Aurora?
I live in Aurora, but I work in Aurora.
It's like I guess a commute.
Some other input, like he can't just sit down and be like, focus on his computer. Yeah. I don't know if I have to do that, but I tend to. Yeah, he kind of needs.
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely gonna look at that.
You're going to, it's going to be lots of training.
Yeah.
We did a New York City camp. Keep with the groups.
Yeah,
That was great.
Private,
I still have to talk.
Yeah, I'm structured.
You got to get on.
That's what for now. Now I'm.
Did you
I'll live on because I'm able to
So you do the whole
yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And I don't know
I'm
what
not
it
sure how
takes.
close being able to, because we're not the state university, so I'm not sure.
It's not certain that-
whether
Yeah,
that's
actually,
bad.
I'm in the state. I'm working for a state college.
But education and ideas are banned from talking to each other.
Yeah.
So your qualification for education doesn't
I mean, because even like Cornell has private colleges and state colleges.
Right. Yeah.
But the one I'm doing is public.
The pretty sure Adams again. Actually, if you contact me, I'll put you in touch with my manager. Chris used to be in the training.
So I think we need to find out.
But she seems to understand how you get qualified. So she can point you in the right direction. What you talk to.
Literally knows how to use those and why not.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, and worse, he's talking about talking to procurement, which we built. And
Do you work with them or?
I work in a different cluster. One of the things that I've been trying to promote since I've gotten there 2 months ago is that we should all be talking to each other. So Valerie and I and her team and my team have fought battles trying to work together so that we aren't, like, she isn't doing something that we can't do. We don't do things that she can't do. You know, I think you guys are really busy in the band training.
Then you have
Nobody
to
moving it, so it's not, which is terrible coordination.
Yeah, well, yeah, because Adam has a report.
Yeah, we don't even know how he got out of it.
I don't know how he
And of course, you know, well, for a long time, they're starting to slowly flex that a little bit. But the irony is that they can go to a class and be trained, and you know, and since I'm the consultant, I can't be trained with them, so I don't know what they're being told. So, for all I know, you're teaching in the orthogonal, which is fine, except then they come back and I say, do it this way, and they go, well, the class said do it that way, and it's like, yeah, but.
There's 20 different ways to do that.
And that's always been my argument. It isn't so much that you're training me, it's just that you're making me aware of what they're being trained in, so that we don't negate the training. Which is, I think I'm slowly, but then we still have the problem that, you know, it's like, it wasn't really fun to be innovative.
Very interesting.
Finally decided to proceed.
So we've got these very
Eventually look at
great
because everyone knows who you are. So you can't get stuck into anything.
That's right.
Once you get on, let us send us some feedback.
Yeah. Well, let's see what we can do to help you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I really wanted to hear the entity references.
Oh, versus. I can tell you the short form.
That's okay.
It's basically saying that, like, there's certain modules